Tony is like, you know what? I'm all in. $1.8 million in the middle.
Seriously, what the f are you doing?
Attacker with the limp. Limping can make sense in an environment where you play with an ante, and players are generally quite shallow. So 200,000 is not that much at a 1K, 2K game with an ante. If you open raise, especially large, like 8.5K, a 3-bet is a huge amount of the 200K. So it can make sense to develop a limping range and a potting range, or a limping range and a 3x, 3.5x range, in order to see a few more flops and compete for the blinds and antes in the middle. So Attacker chooses to go for the limp, and Tony G in the big blind makes it 11,500.
I raise the pot.
And obviously, as you limp in, big pairs and hands that generally don't play that well against a 3-bet, you also want to include some of your traps in there and then limp re-raise. So Attacker here coming in with the limp re-raise to 40,000. Back to the one and only Tony G, just lost an $800,000 pot against Leon. Back raises to 125,000. And Attacker just calls. Flop is 10 deuce 4, all in, third pot, Attacker with the call. All right, so let's have a look. Tony has ace 6-9, completely standard on all streets, and Attacker with the limp re-raise with jack 10-9-8. So first of all, jack 10-9-8 is a very playable hand. You can 3-bet, you can 4-bet. Like, you will see this kind of hand class in all sorts of different parts of the game tree. The thing though is that if you have a hand with no gap, so there's no gap between the jack and the 10 and the 9 and the 8, this hand is a perfect or pure rundown. That kind of hand plays also really well in multi-way pots, because through its connectivity, it has a lot of nuttiness, which is the component or characteristic you're looking for multi-way pots. So you will not find a solver necessarily limp re-raising or even 4-betting much with that kind of specific hand, jack 10-9-8 no gap. Rather so picking hands like 10-8, 7-6 or jack 10-9-7, maybe jack 9-8-7, basically hands with a gap, because those will play worse in a multi-way single raise pot, and therefore they choose to mix in with your aces as a bluff. And if you get 5-bet, you can call with all those combos. So if you show up with the pure rundown, you generally just want to limp call. If you have some gaps in there, you're going to go for an aggressive action every once in a while, especially if your opponent is capable of folding hands like ace, king, king, or king, king in general, which on this table, or against Tony G, I kind of doubt it. And then obviously Tony shoves the flop with third pot left, which is completely standard, and the call with top pair is also standard, looking at 41% here against the aces. Turn is an ace though, turn is an ace, turn is a deuce. That's also a really bad card, and Tony ships the pot. 1K, 2K, 1.5K ante, 3x open. I talked in part 1 about why raising less than pot is or can be beneficial. We see 2 calls from Leon and Tony. Tony now in 400K. And the big blind is a new player that we haven't seen in part 1, Namos Miko, I don't know what the rest of the name is. 9-5 deuce. In this case, Tony with the pot size bet. We see a call by the big blind Namos, $25,000, and Leon calls as well. Turn is a 4, 100K in the middle. Stack the pot ratio here, anywhere between like 2.7 to 3.7. And the 4 is obviously a card that, anyone can really hit. Tony was leading. He can have combo draws in the flop that now have the nuts, although quite unlikely. Like 3-6 is pretty unlikely to lead the flop. Most hands that would lead are like 9-5 or 9-9 or 5-5 or some sort of like nut flush draw with 6-7 potentially. So at this point, they have an open-ended straight draw and a nut flush draw, but 6-3, relatively unlikely. So we should see a lot of checks from Tony, but he does go ahead and continue. This time he goes ahead and sizes down to 60K. So it makes it a little bit cheaper, and Namos with another call. And Leon with a quick back raise to $343,000. Tony is in 370, and this will be a big pot. Already $878,000 in the middle. Namos is folding, and we see a call. Another big matchup here, Leon versus Tony. So here's the call, $900,000 in the middle. Let's see what they show up with. So we got Leon with the nuts, 9-8-6-3. So he did turn 6-3. Has no redraw. And Tony G with the absolute nuts. He has also 6-3, but also has 6-7 and clubs. So he is looking here at additional equity, 66% of equity in order to win this pot. Obviously on a blank, they're going to chop, but basically Tony is kind of free rolling I mean, Leon does have, what does he have? 6-8. So like a 7 would give him a straight, but otherwise pretty rough. Most of the time they're going to chop, but obviously Tony can hit a club or can hit an 8 for a straight or a 3 for a straight or a better straight. So let's see. They obviously run it one time because why not? Just a milli. And obviously Tony G with the bink. This time he wins the pot. $900,000 with the flush. 6 high flush on the paired board. Has to be good.
Oh no.
So Leon is now at 500k. Calls an open raise from under the gun. Abe Emmy with 6x. Not 6x, with 6k, which is 3x. John the Fast in the big blind is in the tank. Makes it 26,500. So coming in for the squeeze. See a call by Ape Emmy. And Leon is not the type of player to make a fold here. In fact, you shouldn't really fold in this position anyway, closing the action. So 10-9-5. SPR2. This is a spot where John has no small betting range. He wants to pot or check. And you want to trap, obviously, some hands. You know, let's say you have a hand like ace, ace, queen, jack with an unflush draw. Like, that's a good hand to be checking. Maybe a hand like aces, not flush draw, and a slightly weaker straight draw with a backdoor flush draw, or maybe like pocket 10s with a flush draw, 10-9 with a flush draw. Like those are the kinds of hands you want to check and induce with. The medium strong hands, they generally just want to pot. And if you have bare aces in this spot, you generally just go ahead and check fold 3 ways. Like the only player that has an incentive to bet smaller than pot is going to be Leon on the button, because he will face 2 checks in case he does face 2 checks, and can take a smaller step. For example, a third of the pot or half pot is the preferred sizing versus full potting there in position. But for the other 2 players, it's either pot or check. And we do see a pot and an all-in, and $400,000 will find their way into the middle. John the Fast has ace, ace, jack, jack. So he does have the overpair, backdoor non-flush draw. And this is the bottom of the stack-off range. This is a correct stack-off here, a correct potting hand, but it is very close to break even because of the very marginal additional equity. But the thing is, if he has a jack of clubs and 2 jacks, he's blocking the hands that can stack off, or if people stack off, they have less equity with their combo draws. He also has the backdoor not flush draw with the spades. And if John didn't have any of those, or would remove one of those components out of his hands, so if he doesn't have the club or doesn't have the backdoor not flush draw, he would actually go ahead and check fold this spot. And then Ape Emmy at SPR2, if you flop an overpair and flush draw, you're not going to fold. So this is the correct stack off. So the hand is actually played correctly by both players. But in this case, we will see John the Fast scooping the pot, running it twice there, $400,000. Nice hand. We're still playing 1K, 2K, pot size raise under the gun. Tony with the snap call. Namos calls as well. And this is actually a very interesting spot. So
stop it. Get some help.
Let's go back here for a moment. Like all the players remaining, they really have to consider the fact that Ape Emmy only has 20k behind. And that makes a big impact on how many hands you want to call in these positions, because if Ape Emmy back raises, then Leon faces a reopened action and can back raise over the top and then raise these players potentially out of the pot. So you want to be careful not calling too many hands for once, and then secondary, you potentially also want to include some very strong hands in this calling range, because Ape Emmy's position is extremely lucrative. There's $30,000 in the middle, and he or she has to risk only $20,000 to play for the $30,000. And if there is a decent chance that Leon is going to back raise over the top and force these players to fold, then he can basically stick it in with any 4 cards almost. You obviously don't want to do it with any 4 cards, just because there's no guarantee that Leon will back raise, or there's no guarantee that the other players will then fold. But it is a very lucrative spot, and it does have to impact those cold calling ranges in between a lot. So anyway, Leon just calls, and Tony calls pretty quick as well. Namos now back raises, so he comes in with a trap, and you notice he was tanking a little bit pre-flop, so probably thought about squeezing, but then realized that Ape Emmy is quite shallow and went for the trap. Makes it 110,000. Leon, faced with a decision, makes the call, and then Tony folds. Flop is 9-6 deuce, 2 hearts and 1 spade. Ape Emmy already all in. And there's 180,000 in the middle. Actually, there's 267,000 in the middle. 180 is the side pot. All in, and we will see a call. So 680,000 in the middle. Let's have a look what they have. Ape Emmy shows up with Jack 8-7-3. I think this is a very profitable play to squeeze all in for 20k into 30k. hoping to force some people out of the pot. In fact, he was able to force Tony G out of the pot and is guaranteed to realize his equity because it's already all in. And then Leon has ace, 2, 3, 4 double suited. This is a hand that looks a lot better than it is. Obviously, you have the ace high suit, but all the other components, they suck. Like the 4 high suit is really bad, and the connectivity 2, 3, 4 is also really bad. So this hand generally plays pretty terrible against most ranges. The thing though is that he flopped the nuts basically. So nice flop for Leon. And then Namos has just a standard play, like he goes for the back raise with aces, sticks in a third of his stack. And then on the flop for stack to pot ratio of 1 and the main pot being, or the side pot being much larger than the main pot, he has a clear stack off with aces, 8 deuce. He only has 1 pair, but at this point, as there's so much money in the middle and the board is quite disconnected, he cannot allow himself to fold aces anymore. It's obviously not a great spot, but you got to get it in. And miraculously, he holds at least against Leon, which is the big pot, 600,000.
Oh, relax, it's only magic.
So Leon back to 200,000 now. Pretty swingy day. Tony on 800. Can't really tell if Tony's up or down at this point, but he might be up, but probably close to break even. Ataka has been losing a bunch of pots, and Leon as well. They're facing here a queen 6-3 flop, pot size c-bet by Leon in this single raise pot. Stack to pot ratio of 8. So again, you generally want to bet smaller in these spots and spread your bets out over flop, turn, river. Allows yourself to also bet a wider range of hands. Ataka with a check raise on the flop, and Leon sticks it in and gets called. And Leon shows up with ace, king, queen, 7. So bare top pair, no backup. This hand is a punt. You do not want to get it in with 1 pair at SPR 8. You do need some backup, like a flush draw or like a big straight draw with a backdoor flush draw, something along those lines. And Ataka has a standard play. He can go ahead and lead this hand also on the flop. It has tons of playability. He has a wrap and a flush draw and a backdoor flush draw. But if he checks, he always wants to check raise, even though he's sometimes going to be dominated in terms of flush draws. He just has too much equity and too many playability features in his hand to act on any sort of turn card that he wants to check raise the flop and pump money in the middle. And if he happens to know that that Leon is actually stacking off too light, then obviously this becomes a print. And in fact, he looks down at 71% equity, even though he has only 10 high. So great spot to make some money. And he does make the money and wins $341,000, or a pot of $341,000. Namos in the tank, $643,000. He's not even chip leading Tony now with $1 million. So we see a raise in a 3-bet. Leon sitting close to 400,000. Makes it 28,000 and gets called. Flop is queen 8-4. Stacked pot ratio, what is this? Like 9. So again, like similar to like a single raise pot in this case, you want to simplify your out of position strategy to like a 66% bet, 75% bet, and use quite polarized hands. You know, you're looking at hands like aces with the nut flush draw blocker, queen X blocker with a club blocker. You're looking to be betting hands that have like straight draw, flush draw potential, especially if they're towards the stronger end. But I would say in general, when you're out of position in this spot, it's not a great situation to start betting necessarily, because there are so many difficult turns to play at such high stack to pot ratio that the majority of your range should probably go ahead and check and be a little bit careful here. But obviously, careful is not Leon's name or first name or last name. He goes ahead and pots 58,000. So again, if the SPR is this high, you generally want to go smaller, but this is no small ball poker here. Namos pots it over the top, $233,000. Again, these guys are very deep for a 3-bet pot, SPR 9. Leon in the tank now. What should he do? All in. And he will get called. No surprise. $790,000. What do you guys think these guys will show up with? Well, Leon has ace, ace, king, queen, 1 pair, and Namos has top set, queen, queen, 8-7. So as far as preflop is concerned, Namos open raise is okay. Like it's a little bit loose considering how shallow the small blind and the button is. But hey, there's an ante out there, and also you might get some loose action by someone like Loose Leon, for example. Leon's 3-bet is obviously completely standard. Actually, on the flop, he does want to bet this hand because he does have blockers to the value range of his opponent, right? He has the queen of clubs, And also he does not have a hand that can check call. Like this hand just sucks check calling. It's very hard to play turns. So the way to play this hand is you want to bet the flop large and then fold against the raise. You can bet 2/3, 75%, or full pot even if you want to. Wouldn't be my preferred option, but it's a fine option to take, and then fold against the raise, not get it in an SPR 9, because you're going to be crushed against anything really, even against top pair and a flush draw, or a straight draw and a flush draw in combination. Like this hand is just going to be crushed. And sometimes it is fine to be quote unquote crushed if the stacked pot ratio is 1 or 2 in like a 4-bet pot or in a shallow situation. But Pot Limit Omaha is so equity based, and equity is highly influenced and impacted by the stacked pot ratio. So as you become deeper post flop, gotta be really careful and sensitive towards the SPR when it comes to the types of hands and your threshold for stacking off. So this is too light. And in this case, he does get punished, at least on the flop, an 800k pot with 12% equity. But the turn is obviously the ace turning Namos. That's brutal way to lose an $800,000 pot. GG, money to Leon. This game is not big enough, so let's bump it up to 1k, 2k, 4k with a straddle under the gun here and an ante of 1.5k. Why not? Tony makes it 12,000, goes for the 3x of the straddle. So Namos and Ataka are very shallow in this spot. Ataka makes it, so basically like the way to think about this is like Ataka has 200k, the blinds are 1, 2, 4 with an ante and a pot size open raise. So like he's not even 50 big blinds deep really. Like he's actually shallower than that because of the amount that is already in the middle and the 3-bet sizing he can choose. So this is a shallow spot. SPR is close to 2 in a 3-bet pot, queen 7-3. Ataka can go ahead and bet something like 1/3 or 40% of the pot, but also wants to heavily use a pot size sizing in this spot just to realize equity with bad aces. Again, this is a spot where the SPR is so low that if you just have aces, you want to pot and deny equity, or at least make your life easy for turns and rivers. In fact, you will not even play rivers because the money will be all in before, which is exactly what you want if you have bare aces. So this is a pot size or small bet situation. Obviously checking is a possibility as well. Taka goes for pot. Tony on the button. He called the 3-bet after open raising. Gets it in. Let's have a look what they have. Tony has a set, ace, king, 3-3. Actually, this is a hand played fine. You're not printing calling a 3-bet with this hand, but it's going to be still too strong. If your opponent happens to have like a rundown, you know your ace and king are still good. Obviously, hearts are good, and a 3 is very good. Ataka's 3-bet at this shallow of a stack size. It could be fine. It depends how he perceives the open raising range. We saw before that some players open raise really lose, in which case ace king 10-8 plays well at a SPR 2 situation. Like you're gonna flop a lot of top pair hands, which are good enough in this case to just pot get it in. Obviously, sometimes you will get coolered, but I would say the default would be to call this hand because the 8 is quite worthless. And unless you're double suited. And if you had a jack or a 10, you definitely 3-bet. If you're double suited, you 3-bet. And if you think your opponent is extremely wide pre-flop, I mean, you can also throw in a 3-bet if you want. But in this case, Tony makes quads on the turn, $500,000 over to Mr. G. Played it like a set.
I love Tony G.
Under the gun, pot, Ataka with the call. You shouldn't call like much in this position when you're this shallow. Like the calling range, I would assume is going to be like 1% or something. In theory, obviously. Calls a squeeze by Omaha for rolls. Flop is 9-7-3. 2 spades and 1 club. And again, this is another pot size or check situation. Ataka chooses to pot, which could be fine. You know, not trying to give away free cards with a stack of hands and the money goes in. Taka has 9-7-6-6, so pre-flop is obviously not a good idea to call this hand against the initial open raise. Once you face the squeeze, I guess it doesn't matter that much. Like you can also call the squeeze. You probably should actually, given how much you already invested. And Omaha for rolls has like no real decision, pre or post. So 2 pair against an up flush draw and an over pair. First one goes to Omaha for rolls, and the second one as well. Pretty sweet spot. Leon on the mill ball, pot. 8,500. Tony G calls. Namos calls. Ataka could squeeze for a large amount. Doesn't choose to do so. 3-way to the flop. Leon checks. Tony G. So again, the player in position has the most incentive to bet and the most incentive to bet small. And Tony is actually going to do that, which is a good idea. So nice play. Goes for A little bit less than a third of the pot. Namos goes for the call. And Leon now, next to act, bumps it up to just casual 60,000. Tony with the snap fold. And Namos with a decision. Thinks it through. He doesn't have that much behind, really. 100 and what is this? 3,000. Goes in. And Leon makes the call, and they show up with the nut flush draw and a pair for Leon, and a wrap backdoor flush draw with a diamond blocker for Namos. So pre-flop Namos should just fold his hand, and then on the flop, I think Leon has the perfect hand for an actual C-bet in a three-way spot. He has a lot of blockers to his opponent's continuing range. He has a 9 and 3 diamonds, and because you have 3 diamonds, this hand doesn't benefit as much from taking a free card or getting a free card. So therefore, you're kind of turning it into a bluff by c-betting the flop, essentially. But check raise is also a fine option. You do want to put a lot of aggression into this pot with this hand. If Tony G obviously back raises from the 60k to something like 200,000, like you want to fold your hand. And then from Nama's position, I don't think you can fold anymore with this hand. It is a little bit more EV to just call the raise and then act on turns to try to dodge a diamond. And like some of the diamonds you will still stack off on if he makes a straight, for example, but some of the diamonds you can also fold. And he happens to make a straight, takes down a pot. This will be a relatively big pot, okay? Promise. It starts slow though. Attacker with a limp. Leon with another limp. Tony in the big blind. He will raise, don't worry. Raises it up. I'm not really sure what the sizing is. Did he like manually put in 7,600? Like, or I guess he used like a certain button, like 75% or so, but he wasn't pot size ISOing, I guess. Attacker with the call, and then Leon with the back raise to 31, close to 32,000. Snap back raise by Tony, 100,000. These guys are $900,000 deep, by the way. So no fear in Tony's heart. What about Leon? Back raise, 323,000. Notice, Leon overlimped preflop against attacker's limp and now comes in for the back raise. And Tony is like, you know what? I'm all in. Let's just make this a big pot. Almost $2 million are in the middle. $1.8 million in the middle. Tony G against Leon. And that means they have aces over aces. Tony G sitting on double suited connected aces, ace, ace, 10, 9, hearts and spades, and Leon on the clubs and the 6, 9. They will run it only one time. Imagine this flop, free rolling on the hearts for a $1.8 million pot. Turn is a deuce, river, 4. All right, they split it up, but hey, it was a big pot. It was a big pot.